Good evening, welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Paul Karitsis, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the underworld. A great many centuries before Jewish and Christian ideas surrounding heaven and hell appeared, the progressive and sometimes outrageous poets, playwrights, historians and philosophers of classical and pre-Socratic Greece had already bequeathed to the Mediterranean world a pantheistic religion and a literary tradition surrounding majestic gods and goddesses whose behaviours imitated outright those of their mortal subjects. The 12 primary deities, all of which can be loosely associated with psychological and cosmic archetypes, ruled the living world from the mount of heavenly Olympus and were equally capable of virtuous or malicious behaviour. The humanistic mirror with which the ancient Greeks perceived their divinities spilled into the more fundamental questions that sought to address life after death and the destiny of the human soul. If the divine realm and its inhabitants were morphologically and anatomically comparable to the earth, then so too must the underworld, the subterranean abode of the deceased, be a shadowy, though sullied duplicate of the latter. According to Hesiod, the oral poet who first mapped out the mythological terrain as well as the divine and semi-divine family pedigree of ancient Greece, the first conscious derivatives of the primordial chaos, so the undifferentiated slime of uncreation, were the physical earth, Eros, or the principle of divine love, the dark night, and Hades, an infernal region that could be further divided into an upper tier called Erebus and a lower tier called Tartarus. The first was a dimension that welcomed the recently departed, whilst the second a hellish prison designed to torture evildoers. In attempting to institutionalize the religiously flavored literature, many subsequent mythographers of Hellenism confounded the two aforementioned terms and used either to designate the underworld. While proceeding in a logical manner, Hesiod's account of creation seems to be a bountiful but bloody and belligerent affair, as a prevailing order of deities are supplanted by a new generation, often their own children. One of the bloodiest involved the fearsome Titans and the Olympians, in which the former lost a battle that lasted 12 whole years and were hurled into the depths of Tartarus as a result. The trajectory of this absolute lightlessness and silence to the earth was immense, so immense in fact that an anvil being dropped from heaven would take a whole 9 days and nights to get there. Interestingly, the first account of Hades given by Homer is painstakingly simplistic and bland. Hades appears as a preternatural realm ravaged by inertia and an absence of vitality and force, and it isn't until much later that the mythographers give us a clearer picture of its geography and ethereal landscape. Entrance to this harrowed abode was by various caverns and deep lakes, with the one most frequently cited being a cave in close proximity to Marmari in the southern Peloponnese, called the Teneros. The soul or psyche of a recently departed individual will be guided to an enclosure beyond this spot by Hermes the psychopomp, whereby he or she would come to the dreaded river, the river Styx, which means hated, and its 5 tributaries, which were the Phlegethon, which means burning, the Cocytus, which means wailing, the Acheron, which means woe, the Aornus, which means birdless, and the Lethe, which means forgetfulness. When describing Hadean terrain, tradition aptly keeps to the transcription of a quartet, though which 4 comprise it varies from author to author. Down near the banks of the delta, a decrepit old man, euphemistically named Charon, or bringer of joy, waited patiently for the arrival of the deceased individual who would be ferried across the subterranean river, once payment in the form of an obelisk was made. All hope of a return to the land of the living was quashed once ethereal footprints were made on black silt, abounding on the opposite side. From here, one had a perfect view of the many-gated palace of Hades, a single edifice set in a barren and desolate stretch of fields which brim with ashen, wraith-like flowers, asphodel. Continuing along this path, the deceased would be greeted by a 3-headed, serpent-tailed dog called Cerberus, and steadfast escorted through the gargantuan gates that led to the preternatural meadows. Rulers of this parallel dimension were Hades, or Pluton, brother of Zeus and Poseidon, and his wife Persephone, daughter of Demeter. Hades' second name means wealthy one, and recalls the ripening metals, gems, and semi-precious stones, the expensive and opulent jewellery often intoned with the deceased, and the condition of fecundity that possessed the topsoil soon after the spring equinox. The underworld was not only a place of death and suffering, but also a transitory state of gravidity, whereby the spirit of life force could once again return to the earth and yield flowers, fruits and vegetables, lest we forget that it was courtesy of Pluto's tentative intervention that Persephone was allowed to return to the earth provisionally, a decision that satisfied her mother Demeter, who then reanimated the rotation of the seasons. Spending eternity in Hades wouldn't have been a bland or uneventful affair. There were enough sights there to please the eye, as there are rides in Luna Park to please or satisfy the polygonal curiosity of a 10-year-old child. Foremost of the exotic and bloodthirsty revenants was the Lamia, a malevolent and deformed female ogre that cannibalized on human babies, and the Empusa, a vampiric entity that bit the jugular vein of male sleepers as they slept complacent in their beds and drained them of blood. Both were thought to be daughters of Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft and magic. Then there was the dreaded Erinyes, or Furies, a chthonic triad of vengeful spirits that severely punished wrongdoings and those that had violated a solemn oath. The Keres, bloodthirsty death spirits with wings that helped an animating life force depart from a severely weakened body, and the Alastor, a demon that tempted men to commit a wrongdoing and then dutifully penalized them for it. Medusa, the snake-haired Gorgon, was also there. Unaware that her powers had been nullified by the unfortunate condition of death, she went on trying to turn every dead creature to stone. Two residents of the underworld that differed somewhat from the rest in that they could flip between upper and lower worlds were the male twins Death and Sleep. By far the more flexible and creative of the two was Sleep, for he could send bits of etheric radiation up to the world of the living that materialized as dreams. There were two gates through which they passed to reach animate souls, one made of ivory and the other horn-shaped. False dreams, or psychic garbage, diffused through the first, while premonitions, meaningful dreams, and precognitive visions tunneled their way up to the conscious light and erupted in the reposing mind through the second. There was also a long list of mythical celebrities pervading the Stygian regions. All were former residents of the material plane, and all had been damned for offences deemed serious against the circle of mighty Olympians. Punishments for wrongdoings in Hades were undoubtedly harsh, relentless, and handed down to perpetrators without compunction. Sisyphus, for instance, was a Corinthian king whose everlasting sentence involved rolling a large boulder along a steep slope. This rock would steadfast roll back down before reaching the pinnacle, prompting him to return to his starting position and repeat the perturbing endeavour. The mythical king Tantalus suffered an equivalent fate for the barbaric dismemberment of his own son, a sacrifice which he dared to serve up to the gods at a banquet held in their honour. He was strung over a subterranean lake for his crime and left there to wallow in his own misery. The punishment was perpetuated by the fact that he could not quench his thirst or satisfy his hunger. Reaching out for a clump of fruit hanging on a tree instigated a breeze that blew it beyond the limits of his grasp, and the action of veering near the surface of the lake for a sip caused the pool to vanish like a mirage. Attempting to draw up water from the same lake from sifters are the Danaids, the 50 daughters of Danaus, who attempted to escape the inexorable condition of arranged marriage by assassinating their husbands with a shower of hairpins. Elsewhere, the giant Tityus is pegged out along the Stygian fields whilst vultures devour his liver for an attempted rape of Leto at the behest of her divine twins, Artemis and Apollo, and Ixion, king of the Lapiths, is bound to a spinning solar wheel for attempting to enact the same crime against Hera, queen of the Olympians. The original conception of Hades as a spiritual dimension beyond death was without the ancient Persian and Egyptian notion of a psychostasia, a final judgment that conferred a specific destiny to each individual soul depending on the moral nature and worth of its lifetime actions. An obvious explanation to this oddity can be found in the cultural presentiments of early Hellenistic civilization. Unlike both the Zoroastrian, Egyptian, and Roman cultural milieu, which placed insurmountable worth in the value of a judicial mechanism for the resolution of criminal, civil, and administrative affairs, the ancient Greek democratic ideals didn't extend their virtues to the development of legal science and a legal system revolving around the rights of citizens. Nonetheless, an efflux of cross-cultural exchange eventually influenced Hellenistic religious ideas pertaining to the afterlife, and profound evidence for it crops up in a Socratic dialogue composed by the Athenian Plato around 380 BCE. The preeminent philosopher narrates that once the dead were ushered into Hades, they were met by three judges, Aeacus, Rhadamanthus, and Minos. Aeacus, a mythical king of Aegina born to Zeus and the nymph Aegina, was bestowed the task of judging the deeds of expired Europeans. Rhadamanthus and Minos were both sons of Zeus and Europa. It was believed that Rhadamanthus presided over the Asian souls, whilst the renowned Minos, known to the world as the notorious king of Crete who demanded an annual Athenian sacrifice of 7 youths and 7 maidens, was granted an overarching authority over the other two, as a figure responsible for appeals, imposing sentences, and the implementation of a system of codes by which all souls were tried. Those cleared of moral fraud and shown to be of a generally good disposition were allowed entry into the Elysian fields, a place where they could delight their senses with ambrosial gifts like singing, dancing, playing musical instruments like the lyre, and revelling in the laughter of flowery meadows. Alternatively, those which weighed heavily in favour of treachery, discrimination, ingratitude, disorder, and malevolence were ushered to the abyssal dungeon of torment, to Tartarus. Rulings in which a clear-cut decision could not be made resulted in the soul being sent to the asphodel meadows, an ethereal field which somewhat mimicked the earthly plane in its morphology, but was a less than desirable carbon copy of it.